Scene 3. It is a little after 6 o'clock in the evening, 2 months later. Margot is in the bedroom at the right, studying. Mr. Van Daan is lying down in the attic room above. The rest of the family is in the main room. Anne and Peter sit opposite each other at the center table, where they have been doing their lessons. Mrs. Frank is on the couch. Mrs. Van Daan is seated with her fur coat, on which she has been sewing, in her lap. None of them are wearing their shoes. Their eyes are on Mr. Frank, waiting for him to give them the signal which will release them from their day-long quiet. Mr. Frank, his shoes in his hand, stands looking down out of the window at the back, watching to be sure that all of the workmen have left the building below. After a few seconds of motionless silence, Mr. Frank turns from the window.
It's safe now. The last workman has left.
There is an immediate stir of relief.
Whee! Anne, I'm first for the WC.
She hurries off to the bathroom. Mrs. Frank puts on her shoes and starts up to the sink to prepare supper. Anne sneaks Peter's shoes from under the table and hides them behind her back. Mr. Frank goes into Margot's room.
6 o'clock. School's over.
Margot gets up, stretching. Mr. Frank sits down to put on his shoes. In the main room, Peter tries to find his.
Have you seen my shoes?
Your shoes?
You've taken them, haven't you?
I don't know what you're talking about.
You're going to be sorry.
Am I?
Peter goes after her. Anne, with his shoes in her hand, runs from him, dodging behind her mother.
Anne, dear.
Wait till I get you.
I'm waiting.
Peter makes a lunge for her. They both fall to the floor. Peter pins her down, wrestling with her to get the shoes.
Don't, Peter, stop it! Ouch!
Anne, Peter.
Suddenly, Peter becomes self-conscious. He grabs his shoes roughly and starts for his room. Following him.
Peter, where are you going? Come dance with me.
I tell you, I don't know how.
I'll teach you.
I'm going to give Mushi his dinner.
Can I watch?
He doesn't like people around while he eats.
Peter, please.
No!
He goes into his room. Anne slams his door after him.
Anne, dear, I think you shouldn't play like that with Peter. It's not dignified.
Who cares if it's dignified? I don't want to be dignified.
Mr. Frank and Margot come from the room on the right. Margot goes to help her mother. Mr. Frank starts for the center table to correct Margot's school papers.
You complain that I don't treat you like a grown-up, but when I do, you resent it.
I only want some fun, someone to laugh and clown with. After you've sat still all day and hardly moved, you've got to have some fun. I don't know what's the matter with that boy.
He isn't used to girls. Give him a little time.
Time? Isn't 2 months time? I could cry.
Catching hold of Margot.
Come on, Margot, dance with me. Come on, please.
I have to help with supper.
You know, we're going to forget how to dance. When we get out, we won't remember a thing.
She starts to sing and dance by herself. Mr. Frank takes her in his arms, waltzing with her. Mrs. Van Daan comes in from the bathroom.
Next.
She looks around as she starts putting on her shoes.
Where's Peter?
As they are dancing.
Where would he be?
He hasn't finished his lessons, has he? His father'll kill him if he catches him in there with that cat and his work not done.
Mr. Frank and Anne finish their dance. They bow to each other with extravagant formality.
Anne, get him out of there, will you?
At Peter's door.
Peter? Peter?
Opening the door a crack.
What is it?
Your mother says to come out.
I'm giving Mushi his dinner.
You know what your father says.
She sits on the couch, sewing on the lining of her fur coat.
For heaven's sake, I haven't even looked at him since lunch.
I'm just telling you, that's all.
I'll feed him.
I don't want you in there.
Peter!
Then give him his dinner and come right out, you hear?
He comes back to the table. Anne shuts the door of Peter's room after her and disappears behind the curtain covering his closet.
Now, is that any way to talk to your little girlfriend?
Mother, for heaven's sake, will you please stop saying that?
Look at him blush. Look at him.
Please, I'm not... Anyway, let me alone, will you?
He acts like it was something to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be ashamed of to have a little girlfriend.
You're crazy. She's only 13.
So what? And you're 16. Just perfect. Your father's 10 years older than I am. I warn you, Mr. Frank, if this war lasts much longer, we're going to be related, and then...
Mazel tov.
Deliberately changing the conversation.
I wonder where Meep is. She's usually so prompt.
Suddenly, everything else is forgotten as they hear the sound of an automobile coming to a screeching stop in the street below. They are tense, motionless in their terror. The car starts away. A wave of relief sweeps over them. They pick up their occupations again. Anne flings open the door of Peter's room, making a dramatic entrance. She is dressed in Peter's clothes. Peter looks at her in fury. The others are amused.
Good evening, everyone. Forgive me if I don't stay.
She jumps up on a chair.
I have a friend waiting for me in there. My friend Tom, Tomcat. Some people say that we look alike. But Tom has the most beautiful whiskers, and I have only a little fuzz. I am hoping in time...
All right, Mrs. Quack Quack.
Peter!
I heard about you. How you talked so much in class they called you Mrs. Quack Quack. How Mr. Smitter made you write a composition. Quack Quack, said Mrs. Quack Quack.
Well, go on. Tell them the rest. How it was so good he read it out loud to the class and then read it to all his other classes.
Quack, 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 quack.
Anne pulls off the coat and trousers.
You are the most intolerable, insufferable boy I've ever met.
She throws the clothes down the stairwell. Peter goes down after them.
Quack, quack, quack.
That's right, Anneke. Give it to him.
With all the boys in the world, why I had to get locked up with one like you.
Quack, quack, quack. And from now on, stay out of my room.
As Peter passes her, Anne puts out her foot, tripping him. He picks himself up and goes on into his room.
Anne, dear, your hair.
She feels Anne's forehead.
You're warm. Are you feeling all right?
Please, Mother.
She goes over to the center table, slipping into her shoes. Following her.
You haven't a fever, have you?
Pulling away.
No.
You know we can't call a doctor here, ever. There's only one thing to do. Watch carefully. Prevent an illness before it comes. Let me see your tongue.
Mother, this is perfectly absurd.
Anne, dear, don't be such a baby. Let me see your tongue.
As Anne refuses, Mrs. Frank appeals to Mr. Frank.
Otto!
You hear your mother, Anne.
Anne flicks out her tongue for a second, then turns away.
Come on, open up.
As Anne opens her mouth very wide.
You seem all right, but perhaps an aspirin.
For heaven's sake, don't give that child any pills. I waited for 15 minutes this morning for her to come out of the WC.
I was washing my hair.
I think there's nothing the matter with our Anne that a ride on her bike or a visit with her friend Joppy de Waal wouldn't cure. Isn't that so, Anne?
Mr. Van Daan comes down into the room. From outside we hear faint sounds of bombers going over and a burst of ack-ack.
Meep not come yet?
The workman just left a little while ago.
What's for dinner tonight?
Beans.
Not again.
Poor Putty, I know. But what can we do? That's all that Meep brought us.
Mr. Van Daan starts to pace, his hands behind his back. Anne follows behind him, imitating him.
We are now in what is known as the bean cycle. Beans boiled, beans on casserole, beans with strings, beans without strings.
Peter has come out of his room. He slides into his place at the table, becoming immediately absorbed in his studies.
I saw you in there playing with your cat.
He just went in for a second, putting his coat away. He's been out here all the time, doing his lessons.
Looking up from the papers.
Anne, you got an excellent in your history paper today. And very good in Latin.
Sitting beside him.
How about algebra?
I'll have to make a confession. Up until now, I've managed to stay ahead of you in algebra. Today, you caught up with me. We'll leave it to Margot to correct.
Isn't algebra vile, Pim?
Vile.
How did I do?
Getting up.
Excellent, 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 excellent.
You should have used the subjunctive here.
Should I? I thought Look here, I didn't use it here.
The two become absorbed in the papers.
Mrs. Van Daan, may I try on your coat?
No, Anne.
Giving it to Anne.
It's all right. But careful with it.
Anne puts it on and struts with it.
My father gave me that the year before he died. He always bought the best that money could buy.
Mrs. Van Daan, did you have a lot of boyfriends before you were married?
Anne, that's a personal question. It's not courteous to ask personal questions.
Oh, I don't mind. Our house was always swarming with boys. When I was a girl, we had...
Oh, no, not again.
Shut up!
Without a pause, to Anne. Mr. Van Daan mimics Mrs. Van Daan, speaking the first few words in unison with her.
One
summer we had a big
house
yeah.
in Hilversum. The boys came buzzing round like bees around a jam pot. And when I was 16, we were wearing our skirts very short those days, and I had good-looking legs.
She pulls up her skirt, going to Mr. Frank.
I still have 'em. I may not be as pretty as I used to be, but I still have my legs. How about it, Mr. Frank?
All right, we see them.
I'm not asking you, I'm asking Mr. Frank.
Mother, for heaven's sake.
Oh, I embarrass you, do I? Well, I just hope the girl you marry has as good. My father used to worry about me with so many boys hanging round. He told me if any of them gets fresh, you say to him, "Remember, Mr. So-and-so, remember I'm a lady."
Remember, Mr. So-and-so. Remember, I'm a lady.
She gives Mrs. Van Daan her coat.
Look at you talking that way in front of her. Don't you know she puts it all down in that diary?
So if she does, I'm only telling the truth.
Anne stretches out, putting her ear to the floor, listening to what is going on below. The sound of the bombers fades away. Setting the table.
Would you mind, Peter, if I moved you over to the couch?
Meat must have the radio on.
Peter picks up his papers, going over to the couch beside Mrs. Van Daan.
Haven't you finished yet?
No.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
All right. I'm a dunce. I'm a hopeless case. Why do I go on?
You're not hopeless. Don't talk that way. It's just that you haven't anyone to help you, like the girls have. Maybe you could help him, Mr. Frank.
I'm sure that his father...
Not me. I can't do anything with him. He won't listen to me. You go ahead, if you want.
Going to Peter.
What about it, Peter? Shall we make our school coeducational?
Kissing Mr. Frank.
You're an angel, Mr. Frank. An angel. I don't know why I didn't meet you before I met that one there. Here, sit down, Mr. Frank.
She forces him down on the couch beside Peter.
Now, Peter, you listen to Mr. Frank.
It might be better for us to go into Peter's room.
Peter jumps up eagerly, leading the way.
That's right. You go in there, Peter. You listen to Mr. Frank. Mr. Frank is a highly educated man.
As Mr. Frank is about to follow Peter into his room, Mrs. Frank stops him and wipes the lipstick from his lips. Then she closes the door after them. On the floor, listening.
Shh. I can hear a man's voice talking.
Isn't it bad enough here without your sprawling all over the place?
Anne sits up.
If you didn't smoke so much, you wouldn't be so bad-tempered.
Am I smoking? Do you see me smoking?
Don't tell me you've used up all those cigarettes.
One package. Meep only brought me one package.
It's a filthy habit anyway. It's a good time to break yourself.
Oh, stop it, please.
You're smoking up all our money. You know that, don't you?
Will you shut up?
During this, Mrs. Frank and Margot have studiously kept their eyes down. But Anne, seated on the floor, has been following the discussion interestedly. Mr. Van Daan turns to see her staring up at him.
And what are you staring at?
I never heard grown-ups quarrel before. I thought only children quarreled.
This isn't a quarrel, it's a discussion. And I never heard children so rude before.
Rising, indignantly.
I rude?
Yes.
Anne, will you get me my knitting?
Anne goes to get it.
I must remember when Meep comes to ask her to bring me some more wool.
Going to her room.
I need some hairpins and some soap. I made a list.
She goes into her bedroom to get the list. To Anne.
Have you some library books for Meep when she comes?
It's a wonder that Meep has a life of her own. the way we make her run errands for us. Please, Meep, get me some starch. Please take my hair out and have it cut. Tell me all the latest news, Meep.
She goes over, kneeling on the couch beside Mrs. Van Daan.
Did you know she was engaged? His name is Dirk, and Meep's afraid the Nazis will ship him off to Germany to work in one of their war plants. That's what they're doing with some of the young Dutchmen. They pick them up off the streets.
Don't you ever get tired of talking? Suppose you try keeping still for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes.
He starts to pace again. Again, Anne follows him, mimicking him. Mrs. Frank jumps up and takes her by the arm up to the sink and gives her a glass of milk.
Come here, Anne. It's time for your glass of milk.
Talk, talk, talk. I never heard such a child. Where is my... Every evening it's the same talk, talk, talk.
He looks around.
Where is my...
What are you looking for?
My pipe. Have you seen my pipe?
What good's a pipe? You haven't got any tobacco.
At least I'll have something to hold in my mouth.
Opening Margot's bedroom door.
Margot, have you seen my pipe?
It was on the table last night.
Anne puts her glass of milk on the table and picks up his pipe, hiding it behind her back.
I know. Anne, did you see my pipe? Anne.
Anne, Mr. Van Daan is speaking to you.
Am I allowed to talk now?
You are the most aggravating... The trouble with you is you've been spoiled. What you need is a good old-fashioned spanking.
Remember, Mr. So-and-so. Remember, I'm a lady.
She thrusts the pipe into his mouth, then picks up her glass of milk.
Why aren't you nice and quiet like your sister Margot? Why do you have to show off all the time? Let me give you a little advice, young lady. Men don't like that kind of thing in a girl, you know that? A man likes a girl who will listen to him once in a while, a domestic girl who'll keep her house shining for her husband, who loves to cook and sew and...
I'd cut my throat first. I'd open my veins. I'm going to be remarkable. I'm going to Paris.
Paris.
To study music and art.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a famous dancer or singer or something wonderful.
She makes a wide gesture, spilling the glass of milk on the fur coat in Mrs. Van Daan's lap. Margot rushes quickly over with a towel. Anne tries to brush the milk off with her skirt.
Now look what you've done, you clumsy little fool. My beautiful fur coat my father gave me.
I'm so sorry.
What do you care? It isn't yours, so go on, ruin it. Do you know what that coat cost? Do you? And now look at it. Look at it!
I'm very, very sorry.
I could kill you for this. I could just kill you.
Mrs. Van Daan goes up the stairs, clutching the coat. Mr. Van Daan starts after her.
Petronella! Liefje! Come back! The supper! Come back!
Anne, you must not behave in that way.
It was an accident. Anyone can have an accident.
I don't mean that. I mean the answering back. You must not answer back. They are our guests. We must always show the greatest courtesy to them. We're all living under terrible tension.
She stops, as Margot indicates that Van Daan can hear. When he is gone, she continues.
That's why we must control ourselves. You don't hear Margot getting into arguments with them, do you? Watch Margot. She's always courteous with them, never familiar. She keeps her distance, and they respect her for it. Try to be like Margot.
And have them walk all over me the way they do her? No thanks.
I'm not afraid that anyone is going to walk all over you, Anne. I'm afraid for other people that you'll walk on them. I don't know what happens to you, Anne. You are wild, self-willed. If I had ever talked to my mother as you talk to me, I would...
Things have changed. People aren't like that anymore. Yes, Mother. No, Mother. Anything you say, Mother. I've got to fight things out for myself. Make something of myself.
It isn't necessary to fight to do it. Margot doesn't fight, and isn't she just...
Margot! That's all I hear from everyone, how wonderful Margot is. Why aren't you like Margot?
Oh, come on, Anne. Don't be so...
Everything she does is right, and everything I do is wrong. I'm the goat around here. You're all against me, and you worst of all.
She rushes off into her room and throws herself down onto the settee, stifling her sobs. Mrs. Frank sighs and starts toward the stove.
Let's put the soup on the stove. If there's anyone who cares to eat. Margot, will you take the bread out?
Margot gets the bread from the cupboard.
I don't know how we can go on living this way. I can't say a word to Anne. She flies at me.
You know Anne. In half an hour she'll be out here laughing and joking.
And
She makes a motion upwards, indicating the Van Dons.
I told your father it wouldn't work, but no, he had to ask them. He said he owed it to them, he said. Well, he knows now that I was right. These quarrels, this bickering.
With a warning look.
Shush! Shush!
The buzzer for the door sounds. Mrs. Frank gasps, startled.
Every time I hear that sound, my heart stops.
Starting for Peter's door.
It's Miep.
She knocks at the door.
Father?
Mr. Frank comes quickly from Peter's room.
Thank you, Margot.
As he goes down the steps to open the outer door.
Has everyone his list?
I'll get my books.
Giving her mother a list.
Here's your list.
Margot goes into her and Anne's bedroom on the right. Anne sits up, hiding her tears as Margot comes in.
Miep's here.
Margot picks up her books and goes back. Anne hurries over to the mirror, smoothing her hair. Coming down the stairs.
Is it Miep?
Yes. Father's gone down to let her in.
At last I'll have some cigarettes.
I can't tell you how unhappy I am about Mrs. Van Don's coat. Anne should never have touched it.
She'll be all right.
Is there anything I can do?
Don't worry.
He turns to meet Miep, but it is not Miep who comes up the steps. It is Mr. Crawler, followed by Mr. Frank. Their faces are grave. Anne comes from the bedroom. Peter comes from his room.
Mr. Crawler.
How are you, Mr. Crowler?
This is a surprise.
When Mr. Crawler comes, the sun begins to shine.
Miep is coming?
Not tonight.
Crawler goes to Margot and Mrs. Frank and Anne, shaking hands with them.
Wouldn't you like a cup of coffee? Or better still, will you have supper with us?
Mr. Crowler has something to talk over with us. Something has happened, he says, which demands an immediate decision.
What is it?
Mr. Crawler sits down on the couch. As he talks, he takes bread, cabbages, milk, etc. from his briefcase, giving them to Margot and Anne to put away.
Usually, when I come up here, I try to bring you some bit of good news. What's the use of telling you the bad news when there's nothing that you can do about it? But today, something has happened. Dirk, Miep's Dirk, you know, came to me just now. He tells me that he has a Jewish friend living near him, a dentist. He says he's in trouble. He begged me, could I do anything for this man? Could I find him a hiding place? So I've come to you. I know it's a terrible thing to ask of you, living as you are, but would you take him in with you?
Of course we will.
Rising.
It'll be just for a night or two, until I find some other place. This happened so suddenly that I didn't know where to turn.
Where is he?
Downstairs in the office.
Good, bring him up.
His name is Dussel. Jan Dussel.
Dussel. I think I know him.
I'll get him.
He goes quickly down the steps and out. Mr. Frank suddenly becomes conscious of the others.
Forgive me, I spoke without consulting you, but I knew you'd feel as I do.
There's no reason for you to consult anyone. This is your place. You have a right to do exactly as you please. The only thing I feel, there's so little food as it is, and to take in another person...
Peter turns away, ashamed of his father.
We can stretch the food a little. It's only for a few days.
You want to make a bet?
I think it's fine to have him. But, Otto, where are you going to put him? Where?
He can have my bed. I can sleep on the floor. I wouldn't mind.
That's good of you, Peter, but your room's too small, even for you.
I have a much better idea. I'll come in here with you and Mother, and Margot can take Peter's room, and Peter can go in our room with Mr. Dussel.
That's right. We could do that.
No, Margot, you mustn't sleep in that room. Neither you nor Anne. Mushy has caught some rats in there. Peter's brave. He doesn't mind.
Then how about this? I'll come in here with you and Mother, and Mr. Dussel can have my bed.
No. Margot will come in here with us, and he can have her bed. It's the only way. Margot, bring your things in here. Help her, Anne.
Margot hurries into her room to get her things.
Why Margot? Why can't I come in here?
Because it wouldn't be proper for Margot to sleep with a... Please, Anne, don't argue, please.
Anne starts slowly away.
You don't mind sharing your room with Mr. Dussel, do you, Anne?
No. No, of course not.
Good.
Anne goes off into her bedroom, helping Margot. Mr. Frank starts to search in the cupboards.
Where's the cognac?
It's there. But, Otto, I was saving it in case of illness.
I think we couldn't find a better time to use it. Peter, will you get 5 glasses for me?
Peter goes for the glasses. Margot comes out of her bedroom, carrying her possessions, which she hangs behind a curtain in the main room. Mr. Frank finds the cognac and pours it into the 5 glasses that Peter brings him. Mr. Van Daan stands looking on sourly. Mrs. Van Daan comes downstairs and looks around at all the bustle.
What's happening? What's going on?
Someone's moving in with us.
In here? You're joking.
It's only for a night or two, until Mr. Crowler finds him another place.
Yeah.
Mr. Frank hurries over as Mr. Crowler and Dussel come up. Dussel is a man in his late 50s, meticulous, finicky, bewildered now. He wears a raincoat. He carries a briefcase stuffed full and a small medicine case.
Come in, Mr. Dussel.
This is Mr. Frank.
Mr. Otto Frank?
Yes, let me take your things.
He takes the hat and briefcase, but Dussel clings to his medicine case.
This is my wife Edith, Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan, their son Peter, and my daughters Margot and Anne.
Dussel shakes hands with everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Thank you all. Mr. Dussel, I leave you in good hands. Oh, Dirk's coat.
Dussel hurriedly takes off the raincoat, giving it to Mr. Crowler. Underneath is his white dentist jacket, with a yellow Star of David on it.
What can I say to thank you?
Mr. Crowler and Meep, they're our lifeline. Without them we couldn't live.
Please, you make us seem very heroic. It isn't that at all. We simply don't like the Nazis.
To Mr. Frank, who offers him a drink.
No, thanks. We don't like their methods. We don't like...
I know. No one's going to tell us Dutchmen what to do with our Jews.
Pay no attention to Mr. Frank. I'll be up tomorrow to see that they're treating you right. Don't trouble to come down again. Peter will bolt the door after me, won't you, Peter?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Peter. I'll do it.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Yeah, see you in the morning.
Mr. Crowler goes out with Mr. Frank. Mrs. Frank gives each one of the grown-ups a glass of cognac.
Please, Mr. Dussel, sit down.
Mr. Dussel sinks into a chair. Mrs. Frank gives him a glass of cognac.
I'm dreaming. I know it. I can't believe my eyes. Mr. Otto Frank here?
To Mrs. Frank.
You're not in Switzerland, then? A woman told me. She said she'd gone to your house. The door was open. Everything was in disorder, dishes in the sink. She said she found a piece of paper in the wastebasket with an address scribbled on it. An address in Zurich. She said you must have escaped to Zurich.
Father put that there purposely, just so people would think that very thing.
And you've been here all the time?
All the time. Ever since July.
Anne speaks to her father as he comes back.
It worked, Pim. The address you left. Mr. Dussel says that people believe we escaped to Switzerland.
I'm glad. And now, let's have a little drink to welcome Mr. Dussel.
Before they can drink, Mr. Dussel bolts his drink. Mr. Frank smiles and raises his glass.
To Mr. Dussel, welcome. We're very honored to have you with us.
To Mr. Dussel, welcome.
The Van Daans murmur a welcome. The grown-ups drink.
Oh, that was good.
Did Mr. Crowler warn you that you won't get much to eat here? You can imagine 3 ration books among the 7 of us, and now you make 8.
Peter walks away, humiliated. Outside, a street organ is heard dimly. Rising.
Mr. Van Daan, you don't realize what is happening outside, that you should warn me of a thing like that. You don't realize what's going on.
As Mr. Van Daan starts his characteristic pacing, Dussel turns to speak to the others.
Right here in Amsterdam, every day hundreds of Jews disappear. They surround a block and search house by house. Children come home from school to find their parents gone. Hundreds are being deported. People that you and I know. The Hollensteins, the Wessels.
Oh, no. No.
They get their call-up notice. Come to the Jewish theater on such and such a day and hour. Bring only what you can carry in a rucksack. And if you refuse the call-up notice, then they come and drag you from your home and ship you off to Mauthausen, the death camp.
We didn't know that things had got so much worse.
Forgive me for speaking so.
Do you know the De Waals? What's become of them? Their daughter Jopie and I are in the same class. Jopie's my best friend.
They are gone.
Gone?
With all the others.
Oh, no, not Jopie.
She turns away in tears. Mrs. Frank motions to Margot to comfort her. Margot goes to Anne, putting her arms comfortingly around her.
There were some people called Wagner. They live near us.
I think we should put this off until later. We all have many questions we want to ask, but I'm sure that Mr. Dussel would like to get settled before supper.
Thank you. I would. I brought very little with me.
Giving him his hat and briefcase.
I'm sorry we can't give you a room alone, but I hope you won't be too uncomfortable. We've had to make strict rules here. A schedule of hours. We'll tell you after supper. Anne, would you like to take Mr. Dussel to his room?
If you'll come with me, Mr. Dussel.
She starts for her room, shaking hands with each in turn.
Forgive me if I haven't really expressed my gratitude to all of you. This has been such a shock to me. I'd always thought of myself as Dutch. I was born in Holland. My father was born in Holland, and my grandfather. And now, after all these years...
He breaks off.
If you'll excuse me.
Dussel gives a little bow and hurries off after Anne. Mr. Frank and the others are subdued. Turning on the light.
Well, here we are.
Dussel looks around the room. In the main room, Margot speaks to her mother.
The news sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? It's so different from what Mr. Crowler tells us. Mr. Crowler says things are improving.
I like it better the way Crowler tells it.
They resume their occupations quietly. Peter goes off into his room. In Anne's room, Anne turns to Dussel.
You're going to share the room with me.
I'm a man who's always lived alone. I haven't had to adjust myself to others. I hope you'll bear with me until I learn.
Let me help you.
She takes his briefcase.
Do you always live all alone? Have you no family at all?
No one.
He opens his medicine case and spreads his bottles on the dressing table.
How dreadful. You must be terribly lonely.
I'm used to it.
I don't think I could ever get used to it. Didn't you even have a pet? A cat or a dog?
I have an allergy for fur-bearing animals. They give me asthma.
Oh, dear. Peter has a cat.
Here? He has it here?
Yes, but we hardly ever see it. He keeps it in his room all the time. I'm sure it will be all right.
Let us hope so.
He takes some pills to fortify himself.
That's Margot's bed where you're going to sleep. I sleep on the sofa there.
Indicating the clothes hooks on the wall.
We cleared these off for your things.
She goes over to the window.
The best part about this room, you can look down and see a bit of the street and the canal. There's a houseboat. You can see the end of it. A bargeman lives there with his family. They have a baby, and he's just beginning to walk, and I'm so afraid he's going to fall into the canal someday. I watch him.
Your father spoke of a schedule.
Coming away from the window.
Oh, yes. It's mostly about the times we have to be quiet, and times for the WC. You can use it now if you like.
No, thank you.
I suppose you think it's awful, my talking about a thing like that. But you don't know how important it can get to be, especially when you're frightened. About this room, the way Margot and I did, she had it to herself in the afternoons for studying, reading, lessons, you know. And I took the mornings. Would that be all right with you?
not at my best in the morning.
You stay here in the mornings, then. I'll take the room in the afternoons.
Tell me, when you're in here, what happens to me? Where am I spending my time? In there, with all the people?
Yes.
I see.
We have supper at 6:30.
Going over to the sofa.
Then, if you don't mind, I like to lie down quietly for 10 minutes before eating. I find it helps the digestion.
Of course. I hope I'm not going to be too much of a bother to you. I seem to be able to get everyone's back up.
Dussel lies down on the sofa, curled up, his back to her.
I always get along very well with children. My patients all bring their children to me because they know I get on well with them. So don't you worry about that.
Anne leans over him, taking his hand and shaking it gratefully.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dussel.
The lights dim to darkness. The curtain falls on the scene. Anne's voice comes to us faintly at first, and then with increasing power.
And yesterday I finished Sissy van Marksveldt's latest book. I think she is a first-class writer. I shall definitely let my children read her. Monday, the 21st of September, 1942. Mr. Dussel and I had another battle yesterday. Yes, Mr. Dussel. According to him, nothing, I repeat, nothing is right about me. My appearance, my character, my manners. While he was going on at me, I thought, sometime I'll give you such a smack that you'll fly right up to the ceiling. Why is it that every grown-up thinks he knows the way to bring up children, particularly the grown-ups that never had any? I keep wishing that Peter was a girl instead of a boy. Then I would have someone to talk to. Margot's a darling, but she takes everything too seriously. To pause for a moment on the subject of Mrs. Van Daan, I must tell you that her attempts to flirt with Father are getting her nowhere. Pim, thank goodness, won't play.
As she is saying the last lines, the curtain rises on the darkened scene. Anne's voice fades out.